Prerequisite class 1. So in this particular lecture, what we are going to cover is the various concepts which we require. Most of these would be those which you would have covered in various different levels of your school syllabus. So some of them would be very basic. Most of you might be aware of it. Still, there could be certain few formulas which you might not recall, or might not have used extensively in your let's say while preparing for school examinations or even your undergraduate examinations. So there are different topics which I'm going to cover. So for the first thing which I'm going to start with is exponentials. So we would be looking at a few basic properties of exponentials. So the first one which we have is x to the power m plus y. This can be broken down into x to the power m into x to the power y. Then again we have x to the power let's say m minus y. This can be written as x to the power m divided by x to the power y. Then we also have x to the power m, let's say whole to the power y. This can be simply written as x to the power my. And just note that here, remember one basic concept, that anything divided by 0 is not defined. So here, since I'm dividing by x to the power y, I just need to make sure that x is not equal to 0. Just a technical condition. Then another rule which we have is any number, any non-zero number to the power 0 is nothing but 1. Few of you might want to think, why this happens, why any number, any non-zero number raised to the power 0 gives us 1. So you could simply apply, let's say, this is known as the quotient rule. The first one could be termed as the product rule. Could be termed as the quotient rule. So using the quotient rule, we can, kind of derive this property that any number raised to the power 0 gives us nothing but 1. So let's say, for example, I take any non-zero number a. A to the power 0 can be written as a to the power 1 minus 1. Using the quotient rule, this can be written as a to the power 1 by a to the power 1, which is nothing but a by a, which is nothing but 1. So again, for those who might not know, why this is the case, it's a very intuitive derivation that any number raised to the power 0 must give us 1. Again, for actual papers, it's just the property we need to use, but it's always good if you know the underlying reasoning as well, why this particular result is coming. It's just not that it's given there. There's a reason, and as we checked out, there's a derivation behind this as well. Excuse me. Then we have few more properties. These were the 4 ones. Then next we have is xy, let's say, to the power m. This is nothing but x to the power m into y to the power m. Similarly, x by y whole to the power m is nothing but x to the power m by y to the power m, given that y is not equal to 0. And finally, what we have is x to the power, let's say, 1 by m. This can be written as nothing but the mth root of x. If you would recall, x to the power half, we simply write this as root x. We do not write anything here, and by default you understand that this is nothing but the square root of x. So you could also write this as one could write this as simply you can write a 2 over here. If you do not write a 2, it simply means square root. Then we could also have the cubic root, the fourth root, so on. So x to the power 1 by m is nothing but can be written as m root of x. So these are the basic properties regarding exponentials. Any doubt regarding this? If not, let me know if I should proceed to the next one, which would be basically the logarithms. Please keep posting yes in case you're comfortable with this topic, or either way, no sir. I mean, if you don't have any doubts. Uh, excuse me. Okay, perfect. No doubts in this. Let's move towards the next one, which is logarithms. Now, this is one part of maths, which quite a few of you, most of the boards do not cover that much in detail, but it's something which is a very useful property, whether it comes to calculating big numbers or, whenever we are dealing with multiplication, division, or any mathematical operation on, large numbers. So for logarithms, again, there are, let's say, various properties of it, but just first to define, what do we mean by log? Let's say we have x raised to the power b and say this is nothing but equal to a. Then what we can write is log supposedly x to the power a is equal to b. So log xb, this x is referred to as base. If I have a b here, then what this tells us is ki what power should the base, in this case x, be raised so that the resulting value is b. So we know that x to the power a is b. So log b is nothing but a. Now there are different bases which we use. The two most commonly used bases are, one is 10 by default, another is something called e, the natural base. We will see, how we define e and so on. So these are the two most common bases. In school level, you would have probably the tables which you would have got, log tables, that would have been for base 10. Here, we would be mostly using e. Even if you would remember certain properties of calculus from school, for example, d by dx of ln x. Ln x is basically short form for log with base, natural base, that is e. This was nothing but 1 by x. So here the base used was nothing but e, the natural base of logarithm. So these are the two most common used bases which we are gonna see. So this was basically about, why logs come, or what do we interpret from this expression. I hope this is clear. If I write log xb, then the answer to this is nothing but to what power should x be raised so that the resulting answer is b, and which we can tally from here is nothing but a. Uh, if in throughout the examination, throughout actual examination, if you see just log, let's say log a, or you see ln a, both of them will mean that the base is nothing but e. By default, in actual examinations, your base is gonna be e, irrespective of whether you write log or you write ln. If there is any other base, whether it's 10, 2, 3, 4, any other quantity, it would be explicitly mentioned over here. This was the first thing which you all should keep in mind. Second thing is, when you're using calculator, which calculator, again, for our entire curriculum, we are going to stick to this particular model, FX82 ES Plus of company Casio. Now here, when you will see, there's a button called logx, and then there's another button called lnx. So for calculator, log x is basically nothing but what they mean is log x, which has a base of 10. And where they have written ln x, that they mean that the base is nothing but e. But while writing wise, if it's in examination or material anywhere, if you do not write anything explicitly in the base, it means that e is the base towards it. Whether you write ln, whether you write log, it is the same thing. Again, more technically, if the base is e, we should be restricting ourselves to writing ln. But equivalently, you can just write log a as well if the base is e. And if there is any other base, make sure you are explicitly writing it down. Now, the few properties of log which we have is, first one, log AB. This is nothing but log of A plus log of B. Again, you will note I have not written any base over here. This is true for all bases, whatever be the base here, whether it's 10, E, 2, 3, 4, anything. It's always, this result always holds. Then if we have log A by B, this is nothing but log A minus log B. Then what we have is log of, let's say, A to the power B. Log of this term A to the power B. This is nothing but B log A. And then finally, which again could be used, log, let's say the base is X and we want this Y. This can be written as log any base C, again the same base C, X. The most commonly used results will be the first three ones. The fourth one is again a sort of manipulation which might help in case there is, let's say, a bit more, it's not maybe straightforward question, a bit more, let's say, steps are required or it's a bit more complicated derivation, then this result might also be used. You can take any base C over here, obviously assuming that C is not equal to 0. And then again, we have few basic results regarding the quantities, this like log 1, whatever be the base, it is always 0. Log 1, whatever be the base, is always 0. And you can understand this. How we understood log what? Log was to what power do you need to raise x? So that the answer is B. So here my question is, to what power should this base be raised? Okay, so that the answer is 1. And we know that any number, any non-zero number raised to the power 0 is nothing but 1. So log 1, whatever be the base, this is nothing but 0. Similarly, log, let's say xx, this is nothing but simply 1. I mean, you could get this directly by applying the fourth one, or again, this is a standard result. If I raise x to the power 1, I would be getting the answer as x only. Note that this is base here. So it's not, ignore my handwriting in case you're getting confused. It's not log x to the power x. It's basically x is the base and x is the, let's say, the argument of it. So this is nothing but 1 over here. So these are few basic properties of logarithm which students are expected to know while preparing for actuarial science papers. Any doubt in this, or shall I proceed to the next one? Okay, no doubt. One more thing which I just want you all to notice, the log function is only defined for, let's say, non-negative, or the log function is only defined for positive numbers. That is, this function, whatever be the base, this log x is only defined where x is greater than 0. If log of any negative number, it doesn't make sense. This number always has to be positive. So again, just another few properties that, let's say, we'll deal with infinite itself. We'll leave that for the time being. Next thing what we have is factorial and permutation and combination, PNC. Again, don't confuse, a lot of you who might be working, PNC is again a term used for property and casualty. It's basically a type of, let's say, it comes under general insurance. Here, what I mean by PNC is nothing but permutation and combination. So let's start with some first factorial. So if I have n factorial, where n is an integer, a positive integer, then n factorial is nothing but n into n minus 1 into n minus 2, so on, into 3 into 2 into 1. So this is nothing but n factorial. And note that n is basically a non-negative integer. Next thing which we have is 0 factorial is equal to 1. And we will see a logical reason as well, why 0 factorial is equal to 1. Again, some of you would have already known if somebody at your school level or maybe at undergraduate level would have explained. Nonetheless, some of you might just have taken it as a result. We'll see why 0 factorial equal to 1 makes logical sense. We would also derive it, and we will also try to understand why it makes logical sense. So we'll come to it. Next, what we have is NPR. P is nothing but here standing for permutation. So NPR is nothing but n factorial divided by n minus r factorial. This is NPR, and next what we have is NCR. This is nothing but n factorial by r factorial into n minus r factorial. Now, if we want to understand permutation combination, so NPR could be thought as the total number of ways of selecting R objects among a total of n objects where order is important. For example, there are, let's say, 5 balls. Ball number 1, ball number 2, ball number 3, ball number 4, and ball number 5. I need to select randomly any 3 balls. So first I select ball number 1, then ball number 4, and then ball number 2. In another try, first I select ball number 4, then I select ball number 2, and then I select ball number 1. Although the combinations are same, but the order in which they were selected are different. So NPR basically gives us the total number of different selection possibilities where order is important, where we are selecting R objects among a total of n objects. So here we have 5 balls in total, and we need to select 3. So the total number of ways in which we can select it will be 5p3. And here order is important. This and this are different. NCR is basically the total number of combinations in which we can select R objects from a total of n objects. Again, just note that the number on the left is on superscript and the number on the right is in subscript. So here, both this combination and this combination would be treated as the same itself. So NCR could be thought of the total number of ways in which you could select R objects among a total of n objects where the order of selection is not important. That is NCR. Now, using this, we'll try to explain why 0 factorial is 1. Now tell me, if I tell you that we have n objects, okay, and we need to select n objects itself. We have n objects, and we need to select n object itself. Excuse me. So can you tell me what are the possible combinations where order is not important? Basically, what I'm asking you is, what should be the value of NCN? Logically speaking, not mathematically, logically, what should be the value of NCN? Got few responses. 1. Okay. Yeah. So the answer is gonna be 1. Again, mathematically, you could see, I will try to explain logically the way we have defined the term combination. NCN, we have n objects and we need to select n objects. So there is just one way, because we need to select all the objects itself. Order is not important. It's like supposedly saying there is one bag and you need to select one bag. So there is just one way. Even if there are 5 bags and you need to select a total of 5 bags, there is just one way where all the 5 bags are gonna come. The order is not important here. So logically, NCN is 1. And using this, now if I use this result, NCR, this will be n factorial divided by n factorial divided by n minus n factorial. N factorial will cancel out. So what we would be left is 1 by 0 factorial. And this should be nothing but equal to 1. And from here, we can conclude that 0 factorial is nothing but 1. So what we started with was not a mathematical part but a logical part, and using this we have been able to show that 0 factorial must be equal to 1. So is this clear to all of you? Okay, just one more thing, there's another way to represent NCR. You can represent this simply as NR. This is equivalent to writing NCR. So you could use either of them, whichever way you are comfortable in. Could you repeat what NPR is used for? NPR is used for selecting R objects, or let's say NPR basically tells us how many ways are there to select R objects out of a total N objects, where order is important. When I say order means, let's say I allow 3 students to ask the doubt, student A, B, and C. If order is important, then A, B, C, A, C, B, B, A, C, so on. All these would be different. All these would be different. If I only ask that order is not important, it's just which 3 students are there, in that case, all these 3 would be same itself. So in permutation P, order is important. In combination, order is not important. So which one needs to be used depends what the question is asking us to calculate. Moving forward, there are again few properties of combination which we're gonna use. The first one being that NCR is nothing but equal to NC n minus R. You can check this mathematically, it's gonna be there. NCR is equal to nothing but NC n minus R. NCN is nothing but equal to NC0, which is nothing but equal to 1. NCN we simply explained right now logically why it is 1. Similarly, NC0, there are n objects, we need to select 0 object out of them. How many ways of the way are there? Just one. We don't select anything. The only way to select 0 objects out of n objects is just one way. You do not select anything. So that's one. And then these are nothing if you just put the numbers. NC1 is n and NC2 is nothing but n into n minus 1 by 2 factorial, which simply you can write as 2. The only reason why I'm explicitly writing these 3 is so that it helps you or aids you in your calculation. You do not have to apply the formula that NC2 is n factorial divided by 2 factorial into n minus 2 factorial. You could simply very well remember this result as well, because these 3 are something which would be used on a more regular basis throughout the actual papers. So this was regarding factorial, permutation, and combination. Next thing which we're going to move forward to is sequence and series. So two things which we're going to look at here is, one is an arithmetic progression and second is nothing but a geometric progression. And then there would be other type of special series as well, but these two are something which I guess all of you must have covered in school level. Yet we'll just see what do we mean by an AP, arithmetic progression, or a GP, which is geometric progression. So AP, basically we have a series which looks in this way. Let's say the first value is A, the next value will be A plus D, the next value will be A plus 2D, and so on. So as you see, it's gonna linearly increase, decrease depending whatever is the sign of D. Note that A, comma A, comma A, comma A, so on. This could also be seen as an arithmetic progression where the difference is nothing but 0. So the terminology used here is A is referred to as the first term. These are the usual terminologies. Again, it could be that different books might be using different terminologies. We are using this for the timing. D is nothing but the common difference. So this is a series. Now two things which you're going to look at is, if I want the nth term, if I want the nth term, where Tn means nothing but the nth term of this particular series, then the formula for this is a plus n minus 1 into d. Again, how do we get this? It's very simple. Look at this way. The first term, T1 is equal to a, T2 is equal to a plus d. So T1 can also be written as a plus 1 minus 1 into d. T2 can be thought to be as a plus 2 minus 1 into d. Similarly, if you go, Tn would be a plus n minus 1 into d. This is nothing but the nth term of the series. Next, what we have is the sum of the first n numbers of a particular arithmetic progression, the sum of the first n numbers. So the formula for this is n by 2 into a plus l, where l is nothing but the nth term of the series. Sn is nothing but n by 2 into a plus l, where l is nothing but the nth term of series. Alternatively, I could also write this as n by 2. If I replace the nth term of the series by this formula, this will simplify to 2a plus n minus 1 into t. So if you know the last term specifically, using this will be more straightforward. And if you just know the first term and you know the value of n, and obviously if you know the value of d, in that case, you would be using this particular term. So this is nothing but the summation of first n terms of an arithmetic progression. Next, what we have is a geometric progression. So in a GP, the terms look in this way: A, AR, AR square, AR cube, so on. So the nth term is nothing but A, R to the power n minus 1. Again, you could try this out in a similar way which we did this. Okay, all these derivations are very straightforward, very logical. I'm not getting into this. Honestly, the derivation of this are also not required. It's just for you to understand that there is logic behind everything. It's not that we have been just given for the sake of it. So these things, at least we are we are in a position where we have sufficient knowledge to be able to explain why this particular formula is coming and so on. Obviously, as you go up higher the papers, there would be few things, few results which we cannot explain intuitively, or if we try to derive that, it might be beyond the scope of your knowledge, because those concepts are not covered in the paper itself. But whatever I'm covering today, these are something which is fairly straightforward, and it's expected that you could reason them out. Again, these things won't be asked directly in examination, but specifically for papers CS1, CS2, and even CM2, few of these properties would be required while trying to solve a particular question. This is Tn, and the sum of first n numbers is nothing but a, r to the power n minus 1 by r minus 1, given that r is not equal to 1. Again, some of you might recall that we used to do two formulas for summation of a GP. This formula was used if mod r was greater than 1, and another formula was 1 minus r to the power n by 1 minus r, where let's say mod r was less than 1. What I would say is both are exactly the same. It's like, whether you write a minus b by c minus d, or you write b minus a by d minus c, it's exactly the same thing. The only reason why some of when your teachers or professors might have been explaining beforehand was two formulas is, we always try to make everything positive. So let's say if mod r is greater than 1, or more precisely, let's say if r is strictly greater than 1, in that case this term would be positive. So we have positive in the numerator, positive in the denominator, which is just something which we are going to be more comfortable with. And if r is less, let's say less than 1, in that case 1 minus r to the power n is going to be positive. So both are exactly nothing but the same. Just remember that this is only valid if r is not equal to 1. because if r is equal to 1, we'll have 0 in denominator, and again this becomes in the form which is sort of cannot be determined directly. And here a is again called the first term and r is called the common ratio. Then we also have is sum of an infinite GP. The sum of an infinite GP. Now this exists. This is a defined quantity only if mod r is less than 1. So S infinite is nothing but a by 1 minus r, and this only exists if mod r is less than 1. So this in words is nothing but the summation of an infinite GP. A is the first term, r is the common ratio, and again note that this is only defined if mod r is less than 1. So this is so far regarding geometric progression. So is it clear to all of you so far? Next, we would be moving ahead to binomial expansion and negative binomial expansion. So far, just confirm me if it's clear to all of you. Okay, perfect. Moving forward to the next one is this is probably the okay, sequence and series is the fourth one. Next, what we have is binomial expansion. So in binomial expansion, what we basically have is a plus b whole square, or let's say a plus b whole to the power n. This is nothing but nc0, a to the power n, b to the power 0, plus nc1, a to the power n minus 1, b to the power 1, so on. Second last term will be ncn minus 1, a to the power 1, b to the power n minus 1, and the last term would be ncn, a to the power 0, b to the power n. This is the expansion for a plus b whole to the power n. Note that if you want something like this, let's say, x minus 7 to the power n, you just need to remember one formula, a plus b whole to the power n. You can think of this to be x plus minus 7 whole to the power n. So instead of a, you will have x, and instead of b, you will have minus 7. So you do not really have to see, how the negative positive sign would vary. You will see there would be an alternative structure, plus, minus, so on. But you just need to remember this, bring everything in this form, and then you can expand this. Again, remember one thing. I don't know how many of you might have been told, this by your school teacher. We were explicitly told. So tell me something. What is a plus b whole square? Some of you would say directly a square plus b square plus 2ab. So first of all, is this correct? A square plus b square plus 2ab. This is the formula which we have for a plus b whole square, right? Exactly. Nothing wrong with this. Only thing is a better way to write. Why a better way? It will just put you in a habit is a square plus 2ab plus b square. And the reason for this is the way we expand a binomial expansion. So this is a more better way of writing it out. Both are exactly same again. See, both are gonna give the same numerical answer. It's just the way. If you put on a habit of writing in this way, if you need to, let's say, write a plus b whole to the power 7, you won't miss out terms, because this is something which has not been commonly used. So far, most of you would have simply dealt with either a plus b whole square or at the most a plus b whole cube, not anything beyond that. So this is a more better way of writing because this is consistent with this particular general expansion for a binomial thing. And note that this results hold only when n is a positive integer. N is a positive integer. In case that it is not, then we will see that there are different ways of expanding it. This binomial expansion only holds true when n is a positive integer. So this was binomial expansion. Next, what we have is a negative binomial expansion. This might be new for a lot of you, ones who have probably studied for ACET, that is the actual common entrance test, which students from II need to give generally. You might have covered this. Some of you might have covered this probably at a school level as well. But again, this is something which could be new for quite a few of you. And this is again extremely important, both specifically in papers CS1 and CS2. Negative binomial expansion. So generally, it's this form we try to bring in, 1 plus x whole to the power p. You might think, why 1? Why not something else? Say you have y plus x whole to the power p. Supposedly, I can write this as y 1 plus x by y whole to the power p. This can be written as y to the power b 1 plus, let's say, z whole to the power p, where z is nothing but x by y. So the point is key, any particular term can be brought into this form by a certain manipulation. So that's why the result which you're quoting is in this form only, 1 plus x whole to the power p. And this is nothing but 1 plus px plus p into p minus 1 by 2 factorial x square plus p into p minus 1 into p minus 2 by 3 factorial x cube, so on. Another way of writing this is nothing but, maybe let's just put it this only for the time being. Okay, so what I was stating was, some of you might think, why am I giving a general form of 1 plus x to the power p? Why not something like y plus x whole to the power p? Why restrict one value towards 1 itself? The only reason is it becomes easier to expand this, and whichever form you get, if you get any number of this form, we can convert this form, or rather this expression, into this particular form. So what I have done here is I've taken a y common. So I'm left with 1 plus x by y to the power p comes out, and then I can write this as 1 plus z whole to the power p, where z is nothing but x by y. And then we can apply this expansion, where instead of z, or let's say instead of x, we have a z, and we can simply expand it. So this is the expansion. This is again something which is available in the actuarial tables as well. A lot of results which I'm going to quote today, they are available in actuarial tables, but it would be good that you remember this by heart. And if you're practicing well, most of you would be remembering it by default. Else some of you might need to, separately put in some time or effort to explicitly remember this. Again, actuarial tables is there, but these are certain very basic formulas frequently used. So it would be good if you explicitly remember these. And you can see how the terms are going to go on. Let's say if I want the 10th factorial term, so the numerator will be p into p minus 1 into p minus 2, so on, p minus 10, and so on. And this is an infinite series. It doesn't end. This is an infinite series, and this holds true for any value of p. Even if it's an integer, you will see that all the other terms will consequently become 0. So this is nothing but an infinite expansion. Few special series from this only, which is very important to remember, is 1 minus x to the power minus 1, which is nothing but 1 plus x square plus x cube, so on. Again, you can very easily do this. One way of doing this is, one of you is asking is, what is the difference with a plus b whole to the power n formula? Here p could be a non-integer. It could be negative integer. It could be fraction. Here n had to be a positive integer. So this result will not hold if n is not a positive integer, whereas this result will hold for any value of p. We will do till what numbers? Nothing. You will see that this, I mean, in the examination, they won't ask you to apply this formula and keep writing all the terms. You would be using this in derivations. So you just need to write maybe 2-3 terms, the general pattern, and then again, they all would be getting combined to give us a numerical answer. So you can state till 2 or till 3 and just give a dot dot dot. You do not need to write the last term. Neither would be this, directly be using for calculation. These are just properties which are gonna be used while deriving certain other things. So 1 minus x to the power minus 1, this is nothing but 1 plus x square plus x cube, so on. Again, this is something you could apply wherein, instead of x, you can put minus x, and instead of p, you can put minus 1. Another way to do is just take a look at RHS. This is nothing but a geometric progression where the first term is 1 and the common ratio is x. And if you apply the formula for the summation of an infinite GP, you will get exactly this itself. So I'm not going into that. That is something you could practice it and you'll see it. It's a 2-line or a 3-line result itself using the property of GP. Another important result is 1 minus x to the power minus 2. This is 1 plus 2x plus 3x square plus 4x cube, so on. So if you'll observe, 1, 2, 3, 4, the coefficients are increasing in linearly fashion. And the power of x, here the power of x is 0, here 1, here 2, here 3, so on. So the power of x is also increasing in a linear fashion. Or you could also say that the x is increasing in a geometric fashion. First it was x to the power 0, then it was x, then x square, then x cube, so on. I hope this one is clear. The pattern, if you all can observe, 1 plus 2x plus 3x squared, so on. So is this clear to one and all so far? Okay. Is it AGP? Yes. We could also say this to be arithmetic geometric progression because the coefficients are in AP and the terms of x are in GP. Result. Yeah, this is a result. 1 minus x to the power minus 2. This is a result which you could remember, and it directly comes by substituting here x as minus x and p as minus 2. No, this is not a universal formula for AGP. I mean, this is a type of AGP. There could be various types of AGP. This is just a special type of AGP. There are various other ways which could be brought into other various ways and be solved. This is just one of the various examples of an arithmetic geometric progression. Example, please. Ganesh, example of what? AGP, do you mean? This is an AGP. This is an example of an arithmetic geometric progression. 1 plus 2x plus 3x squared plus 4x cube. What do we mean by AGP? Where the coefficients are maybe, let's say, progressing in an arithmetic way and the powers of x or the other term is progressing in a geometric way. So that is nothing but AGP. Again, do not get into specifically AGP. It's not required here. We do not need to know what is an AGP because whatever terms are there, the various things which we are covering are sufficient to find all of these. Again, note that the questions are not gonna be what you used to get at school level. Prove this is equal to this. It's not gonna be in this way. They give you an AGP and they tell you what is the summation of this. All these various properties are gonna be used when deriving certain other results, which would be getting covered in the various other chapters, be it CS1 or CS2. Moving forward to the next one. This two notation, you all should know. This is sigma and this is pi. This is used for summation. Summation is nothing but basically adding up things, and pi is nothing but product. Excuse me, where you multiply the things. So for example, if I write summation xi, I runs from 1 to n. So this means x1 plus x2 plus x3, so on, plus xn. And if I write pi xi, I running from 1 to n, then this is nothing but x1 into x2, so on, into xn. So this sigma is nothing but notation for summation. This pi is nothing but summation of notation for product. This is the starting point. This is the ending point. And if nothing else is given, generally the increment, I mean, the first value is 1. The next value will be one step ahead. That is 2, then 3, then 4, so on. Now again, there are few special series which we have. First is e to the power x. So e to the power x is nothing but 1 plus x square by 2 factorial plus x cube by 3 factorial, and it's an infinite series. Note that whenever you know the last term, you have to write the last term, and if it's an infinite series, you can just put a dot 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 so on. With at least put 3 dots, not need to put 7 8 dots. Even if you put 3 dots, it implies that yes, this is an infinite series. This can also be written as summation x to the power k by k factorial, where k runs from 0 to infinite. If you put k as 0, x to the power 0 by 0 factorial, which is nothing but 1. If you put k as 1, it will be x by 1 factorial, which is nothing but x, and so on. So this is the e to the power x expansion. Again, from where this is coming, that is not important for us. This is the result which you're going to use. Again, this is something which should be there in the actual tables as well. The value of e is an irrational number. The value of e approximately till 3 decimal places is 2.718. Similarly, pi, this is an irrational number. It is either 22 by 7, I mean approximately, or in decimal form, this is nothing but 3.14. Note that pi is not exactly equal to 22 by 7. Okay, that is not the case. It is not exactly equal to 22 by 7. If we just want to write it in a fraction form, we generally used to write as 22 by 7. So pi, it is 3.1428, so on, it goes on. So approximately till 2 decimal places, it's 3.14. Similarly, just we had this expansion of e to the power x. We can also have expansion of e to the power, let's say cx. And this will be nothing but summation cx whole to the power k by k factorial, where k runs from 0 to infinite, where c could be either positive or negative, anything. Now there are few properties of this term e. First thing is e to the power, let's say, minus infinite. This is 0. E to the power minus infinite is 0. E to the power 0 is 1. E to the power infinite is nothing but infinite. Again, technically speaking, e to the power infinite is indeterminate, but which form of indeterminate? It is nothing but tends towards infinite only. So these are few just basic properties of e itself. Similarly, we have it for log as well. Log 0. Some of them might say this is undefined, which technically is correct, but log 0, it takes the form of minus infinite. Log 1, it takes this is nothing but 0, and log of infinite is nothing but infinite. Remember that exponential and logarithm are nothing but kind of, you could see it as opposite operations. Just like we have plus, minus, multiplication, division, similarly we have exponential and logarithm. So if you'll observe carefully, 0 1 infinity, the powers are minus infinite, 0 infinite, 0 1 infinite, minus infinite, 0 infinite. So again, these are just basic properties which we would be using. You can get comfortable right now, logically why this would make sense, why this would not make sense. When it comes to solving on the day of the exam, these results should be taken as it is. On the day of the exam, you should not be thinking why log 0 is minus infinite. The time to think about it is right now, definitely not on the day of the exam. So this is the properties of log. Now what we're going to look at is properties of infinite. if we are adding, multiplying, subtracting, whatever things to infinite, what do we ultimately get? So next what we have is properties of infinite. Now, first one, infinite plus constant, infinite minus constant, infinite into constant, infinite divided by constant. All of this gives us infinite. Just note that here C, in the last two specifically cases, C is greater than 0. I mean, one way to look at this is if there is an ocean of water, there's a ocean. Whether you take a drop of water or whether you take any drops of water or you add any number of drops of water, however big it might be, the resulting is going to remain the ocean itself. Similarly, however big or small number you might add or subtract to infinite, the resulting quantity will always be infinite. If you multiply any positive number, however small it might be, to infinite, the resulting answer will always be infinite. If you divide infinite by any number, however large that number might be, as long as it is a finite number, infinite divided by a positive finite number is always going to be infinite. Similarly, minus infinite plus constant, minus infinite minus constant, minus infinite into constant, minus infinite divided by constant is nothing but minus infinite. And in the last two cases, again, C is greater than 0. Similar reasoning. However big or small number you might add or subtract to minus infinite, the resulting answer will be minus infinite. However small number, small positive number you might multiply with minus infinite, the resulting answer is going to be minus infinite only. However big positive number you might divide with minus infinite, the resulting answer is going to be minus infinite only. Then there are few things which we don't know. Infinite by infinite. This could be anything. 0 by 0. This could be anything. This is there. Then infinite into infinite. This is gonna be infinite. Infinite plus infinite is gonna be infinite. Infinite minus infinite. This we do not know. This could be anything, we will see this could be minus infinite, this could be say 0, this could be infinite, or it could be any real number. We will see that. So infinite minus infinite, we do not know. Infinite divided by infinite, we do not know. It takes different answers depending what form of infinite we're looking at, which we will see later on. 0 by 0, again, we do not know. So yeah, this is there. Now I'll just give you an example of infinite minus infinite. Let us take a set of real numbers. The set of real numbers denoted as A. The set of real numbers between 0 to 1. How many real numbers are there between 0 to 1? Infinite. There are infinite real numbers between 0 to 1. Say I take another set which I represent as B, which is the set of all real numbers between 0 to 2. So now how many real numbers are there in B? Infinite real numbers. But this infinite is bigger than this infinite. This infinite is bigger than this infinite. And is that something which makes sense to all of you? Both have infinite numbers, but this infinite is greater than this particular infinite. Is this clear to you all? Perfect. So from here, if you will see, if I let's try to multiply NA, this is nothing but the number of objects in set A minus NB, then this will be nothing but minus infinite. So both of them have infinite numbers, but if I subtract them, I'll get minus infinite. If I do NB minus NA, this will be plus infinite. And suppose I have another set C, which is nothing but real numbers between 1 and 2. Then NA minus NC will be nothing but 0. There are infinite numbers in A, there are infinite numbers in C. But here, both have exactly the same number of infinite numbers. Again, might sound a bit confusing, how can two infinites be equal? We don't even know, we haven't counted. But obviously, logically, we know that we'll have the same real numbers between 0 to 1 as between 1 and 2, because both of them are equidistant on a straight line. So we can see that if we subtract two infinites, the resulting could be minus infinite, infinite 0, or any real number actually. So this is a property of infinite. Another result which we are going to use is limit x tending to infinite. Poly x is nothing but I am just using it as a short form for any polynomial in x. In denominator, we have e to the power cx. And the limiting value of this will be 0, where c is greater than 0. Let me just take an example. For example, if I have x to the power 1000 plus 7, and let's say I have e to the power x, and I need to find this limit x tending to infinite. If you'll put x as infinite, you will get infinite to the power 1000, which is infinite. Infinite plus constant, infinite. So in numerator, we have infinite. In denominator, I have e to the power infinite, which again is nothing but infinite. So this is coming of the form what? Infinite by infinite. But we will see that when we apply the limits, this will basically be 0. How? So this can be written as x to the power 1000 plus 7. E to the power x will be 1 plus x, so on. There would be one term of x to the power 1000 by 1000 factorial. There would be another term of x to the power 1001 by 1001 factorial, and there would be many more terms in denominator. Now I will I will divide by x to the power 1000 in both numerator and denominator. So this will be 1 plus 7 divided by x to the power 1000. Here it will be x to the power minus 1000, so on. This will be plus 1 by 1000 factorial. Next term will be x by 1001 factorial, and so on. I have multiplied and divided by x to the power 1000. Now if we'll put x as infinite, infinite to the power 1000, infinite. A constant divided by infinite is 0. So we get 1 plus 0, which is nothing but 1. In denominator, all the initial terms will be 0. This is a constant, and all the other terms are going to be infinite. So in denominator, what we have is infinite, and this comes of the form 1 by infinite, which is nothing but 0. So this is again a common property which we use. Key limit extending to infinite, any polynomial, however high power you might take, 1 crore, 100 crore, 10,000 crore, doesn't matter. As long as it is in this particular form, its limiting value is gonna be 0. And a very logical reasoning of this is the exponential function always increases at a greater pace compared to a polynomial function. An exponential function always increases at a greater pace compared to the polynomial function. So yeah, this result is there. Hope this is clear to all of you. Next, what we have is few properties of calculus. We'll also look at that. Few properties of calculus, basically differentiation. So d by dx of x to the power n is nothing but n into x to the power n minus 1. D by dx of e to the power cx is nothing but c e to the power cx. d by dx of e to the power fx is nothing but f dash x into e to the power fx, where f dash x is nothing but d of fx by dx. Again, standard notation, something you might have already covered at your school level studies or at your undergraduate level studies, yet I'm just repeating it. These are the various formulas which would be required in actual papers. Then d by dx of ln x. This is nothing but 1 by x. And also, this is a very important result which I have observed a lot of you do not recall or might not have ever let's say uh, studied properly or tried to understand properly during a school level calculus, is f dash x. Now f dash x is nothing but limit h tending to 0 fx plus h minus fx whole divided by h. This is getting the derivation by first principles. All of this result, each and every result we can get from here. This is the starting point. So when we say we differentiate is nothing but the rate of change. F dash x is nothing but the rate of change of the value of function, the rate of change of fx when we slightly change the value of x. So fx plus h minus fx whole divided by h, where h is nothing but tending towards 0. So any result in calculus you want, if we differentiate this, what should we get? We need to simply apply this. Again, something this would be extremely important specifically for actual paper CS2, because this would be used in various cases. So now this is what we have under calculus. So far is it good to all of you being able to understand? Then I'll proceed to the next one. Just confirm me, no doubts so far. Perfect then. Moving forward to the next one is the concept of maxima and minima. Maxima and minima. So let me just draw a graph. Now, this is a point of maxima. This is a point of minima. Remember one thing, there is a difference between something called local maxima, local minima, and global maxima, global minima. So for example, this is nothing but a local maxima. This is nothing but a local maxima. Again, I do not exactly recall whether it's local or global. I'll tell you the difference, either of them. This is the point of maxima, this is the point of minima. But this is not the highest value of the function. I am saying this to be a maxima, but this is not the highest value of the function. We clearly see that this point will give us the highest value of the function. Similarly, this is a minima, but this is not giving us the lowest value of a function, because we see that this particular point is giving us the lowest value of the function. So there are different concepts. I mean, one is termed as a local maxima minima, one is termed as a global maxima minima. So if I don't recall this, I'll check that and get back to you. But what I recall is these points are referred to as the local maxima minima, and these points are referred to as global maxima or global minima. So now what we are going to look at is how do we get the local maxima and minima. So you need to first of all equate f dash x to 0. Once you equate f dash x to 0, you will find different values of x. If f double dash x is greater than 0 at the point where f dash x is 0, then this x will be a point of minima. And if it is less than 0, it will be a point of maxima. And if it is equal to 0, then x will be nothing but an inflection point. X will be nothing but an inflection point. What's an inflection point? It's the point at which the curvature of the graph changes. For example, let's say the function x cube, fx is equal to x cube, f dash x will be 3x square, f double dash x will be 6x. If I equate f dash x to be equal to 0, I'll get x as 0. F double dash x will also be 0 when x is equal to 0. And if we'll take a look at the graph, it looks something of this form. You will see that at this point, there is a change in the curvature of graph. It's changing from, convex to concave, so on. So this is neither a point of maxima nor a point of minima. So the first thing which you do is you equate f dash x to 0, find all the roots of the equation. If second derivative at those points are positive, then those points are point of minima. If they are negative, those are points of maxima. And if it is 0, then that isn't nothing but an inflection point. So is this clear to all of you? From here, if we have a function, let's say y equal to fx, and say f dash x is always positive. If f dash x is always positive, then we say that fx is an increasing function of x. Fx is an increasing function of x. If f dash x is negative for all values of x, then fx is an decreasing. Fx is a decreasing function of x. Now note that this should be for all values of x, then only we can state these two properties. Finally, what we have for today is, no, we have few more stuff as well, sorry. Next, what we're going to do is something called a gamma function. Gamma function. So a gamma function is represented in this form. Let's say gamma a. This is the gamma a. Now gamma a is nothing but the result of this integral, x to the power a minus 1 e to the power minus x dx 0 to infinite. So gamma function is nothing but the value of the integral x to the power a minus 1 e to the power minus x dx 0 to infinite. Now there are few properties which a gamma function has. All these are there given in actual tables, and these can be derived as well. The first one is gamma a is nothing but a minus 1 into gamma of a minus 1. You can get this if you simply apply integration by parts to this, you'll get this result. Similarly, this is the first result. Second result is that gamma n is equal to n minus 1 factorial, where n is obviously a positive integer. N is a positive integer. You can use this result and you will find that gamma n is nothing but n minus 1 factorial. Then what we have is gamma half. Gamma half is nothing but root pi. This is the result which we'll take it to be given. Gamma half is nothing but root pi. Again, all of these are something which are there given in actual tables, but these are pretty common properties of gamma function. If you remember these by heart, it's good. I mean, you do not need to spend time to flip pages of actual tables, look at the formula. These are nothing but the properties of gamma function. And how do we define a gamma function? Again, just for complete clarity, it's the numerical value of this particular integral. Next, what we have is a gamma integral. We had a gamma function. Now what we have is a gamma integral. So gamma integral is nothing but integral of x to the power, let's say a minus 1 e to the power minus lambda x dx 0 to infinite. This is a general way of writing a gamma integral. Note that you could also write it as simply a. The general form, the way it's done everywhere, it's x to the power a minus 1 e to the power minus lambda x dx 0 to infinite. And the value of this is nothing but gamma a whole divided by lambda to the power a. This is the result of gamma integral. If you will note carefully, gamma function is nothing but a special case of gamma integral. If you put lambda as 1, gamma a divided by 1 to the power a, or alpha, whatever it is, 1 to the power anything is 1. And if we'll put lambda as 1 over here, we'll basically get this form: integral x to the power a minus 1 e to the power minus x. So this is also nothing but a gamma integral. It's just a special case, and we say this to be gamma function. So yeah, this is there. And similarly, we have something called a beta integral. We have something called a beta integral, which is of the form x to the power a minus 1, 1 minus x to the power, let's say, b minus 1, 0 to 1 dx. And this is nothing but gamma a into gamma b by gamma a plus b. And this particular integral is often also written as beta a comma b. So this is nothing but a beta integral, which is nothing but can be computed as gamma a into gamma b whole divided by gamma a plus b. And for this integral, we can also use beta a comma b. So this is there. And last part, what we have is curve sketching. Curve sketching. This is very important both for both papers CS1 and more so for CS2 as well. Although right now, given the online mode of examinations, you might not be expected to draw, curve sketches for the paper A part. Paper B, you could very well do it with the help of R programming. But when the exams were offline, and if in futures supposedly exams again become offline, in that case, it's very important to know how to draw or how to sketch a curve. It does not have to be an exact, but the shape of it is something which we can know how the shape of a particular function is gonna look like. So these are the various steps. The first step for curve sketching is find the values of the function. Find the values of the function at the lowest and highest possible value of x. So for example, we have y equal to fx, and this particular function of which we need to sketch a graph. This is for interval a comma b supposedly. So what we need to do first thing is we need to find fa and fp. This is the first step. Second step is find all points. Find all points where f dash x is equal to 0. This will give us the points of minima, maxima, as well as a inflection point, if any. Excuse me. Third, to check the shape. To check the shape, we need to see that if f dash x is greater than 0, means it is a convex shape. And if f double dash x is less than 0, it means it is concave shape. Convex, concave, if you want to know how the structure looks like, this is an example of convex. This is an example of convex. Concave would be this. So this is convex shape, this is concave shape. This I have shown for increasing. Similarly for decreasing, you can also see. So you might also have something like this, and you might also have something like this. So this is convex and this is concave. So these three steps are required. You need to first of all know the value of the function at the lowest point and at the highest point. Then you need to find all the possible values at which we have a maxima or a minima, and then you need to know the shape of it, ki wherever it is convex or wherever it is concave, so on. If it is increasing, it would be in this form. If it is decreasing, it could be in this form, so on. Whether it is convex or concave, accordingly you need to use it. Again, this is something which you will see in right now. Given the structure, you might very well skip it, it might not be required, but for your own conceptual understanding as to how a function behaves, if you're able to follow these steps, you'll be able to draw a rough graph or a rough sketch of any particular function. And finally, we have something called OH, order of H. This is the last topic for this class. What we have is something called order of H, represented as OH. So now we will see when does a function is said to possess the property OH or is said to be called an OH function. Any function fx, if limit h tending to 0, fh by h is equal to 0, then we say that the function x is an OH function. Take any function fx, if limit h tending to 0, fh by h is equal to 0, then fx is said to be an OH function. Now there are few properties of an OH function, which are, first property is adding two OH functions give us an OH function. Subtracting two OH function will also give us an OH function. Note that these are not normal mathematical operations, so that we will say OH minus OH becomes 0. This OH is a function which has this property. So if I subtract any two functions, both of which are OH, then the resulting function will also be an OH function. If I multiply any non-zero constant to a OH function, then again the resulting function will be an OH function. And finally, by definition of it, limit OH by H, H tending to 0 is nothing but 0. I mean, that's how we basically define, an OH function, that limit OH by H, H tending to 0 is nothing but 0. So any function, now let's say for example, I take a function fx is equal to 3x square plus 6. So now fh will be nothing but 3h square plus 6. So now what I need to do is fh by h. fh by h will be 3h plus 6 by h. Now if I put limit h tending to 0, this term will be 0, but this term will be infinite. So this function is not an OH function. This function is not an OH function. But suppose I take this one now. If I take the function, let's say 6x to the power 7, this is my fx. So now my fh by h will be nothing but 6h to the power 7 by h, which is nothing but 6h to the power 6. If I put limit h tending as 0, this will be nothing but 0. So therefore this function is an OH function. Now remember one thing, any function or any polynomial where the lowest power is 1, any polynomial where the lowest power is 1 will always be an OH function. Here the lowest power is 0. This is not an OH function. You have any polynomial where the lowest power is at least 1, or just put it this way, where the lowest power is more than 1, that will always be an OH function. Again, OH function is something which does not has its much use in paper CS1, but in paper CS2 and even in fact paper CM2, it has more applications. So these are the all prerequisites I wanted to cover. That's all from my end.